We see you moving to electric, and so are we. We're installing fast chargers in our Z stations. Z is for New Zealand.
Era has begun, and you will define it. An era where design and performance won't just be desired, they'll be expected. Where passion creates progress, and where new standards will be set. Introducing the new fully electric Audi e-tron GT. Arriving soon.
It doesn't happen often, but when it does, when passion meets relentlessness, when intention meets craftsmanship, when all of this comes together, then it's the creation of something truly progressive. And we've never needed progress so much, have we?
With more EVs hitting the roads, our office buildings are going to be the petrol stations of the future. And this is great, but it's also a big problem, because our buildings weren't designed that way. And if everyone plugged in their new EVs today... My Wi-Fi! Yeah, big problem. That's why Singer Electric is here, offering an all-in-one solution to make your buildings the petrol stations of the future. To do this, we provide 3 things. You never want to pass your building's kilowatt capacity, or... My Wi-Fi! But with EV load management, you won't. Observe. Sally arrives at work early and starts getting a nice fast charge. But soon, her colleagues Tom and Harry also arrive, and the speed of charging is lowered to make sure we never exceed the capacity. If cars leave, perfect. If more cars arrive, perfect. That's smart. Site load management is similar. Our software manages power distribution inside the building and can save up to 30% on your electricity bill. Now that's smart. Oh, and when you get batteries or solar, our software can manage them too. All our systems are flexible and can grow with your decarbonization plan. That's smart. The final part of our service is AI forecast management, which allows us to use AI to evaluate your usage and learn to use your power more efficiently and improve your green star rating. Whew, that's smart. We make it easy, and we do it all in one place, getting your buildings ready for the electric revolution. That's Singer Electric. So what do you think? Is it time to transform your building into a petrol station of the future?
We can make anything. We can make visionary ideas come to life. We can make fashion slow and sustainability fast. We can make anything, but whatever we make, let's make sense.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Warm greetings to you all. It's wonderful to be here. It's World EV Day today, so very exciting. And for those of you who don't know what World EV Day is all about, it's a global movement to accelerate EV uptake. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kirsten Corson from Zilch. Zilch has got two sides of its business. It's got its EV public car sharing side of its business and its EV mobility as a service, and that's where we put EVs and chargers into businesses and we open them up for business and private bookings, allows businesses to earn revenue off their EVs and also not pay FBT. So we're probably at the innovative side of the EV movement. And I also sit on the Drive Electric board, and Drive Electric is an industry group. We've got close to 100 members. We work to support and educate members around accelerating the EV uptake. We also work really closely with the government in an advocacy space, just trying to support the government to develop policies to increase EV uptake. We've also got the Drive Electric website, which is the #1 EV website in the country, which is really exciting. That traffic just keeps on growing. And we've got advertising on that website and great support from our membership. So wonderful to have you all here today. We've got a fantastic panel. So I'll hand over to the panel just to do a quick introduction on who you are, where you're from, and what your superpower is in the EV ecosystem.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Yeah.
My name is Jeff McLaren. I'm the Managing Director of Singer Electrical. My superpower is we look at EV from the car to the installation to the software, and that's we take a holistic view of carbon reduction.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I'm Dwayne Jarrett. I'm the Business Development and Training Manager for Audi New Zealand. My superpower would be educating our network of people in how exciting this industry is today. And if there's ever a time to join it, it's now. That's
Kia ora everyone, Kieran Turner. I head up Z Energy's EV charging business. I think our superpower is our network and our coverage across New Zealand, so our ability to put EV charging out where everyone needs to go and help them keep moving around.
Thanks, Kieran. Duncan Baker, Head of Marketing and Sales for our e-mobility business in New Zealand. And I guess my superpower is 20 years experience in the electrical industry and a couple of years now heading up the e-mobility business in New Zealand. So back to you, Kirsten.
Great. So we've got a great panel. I'm going to warm them up with a few questions. And then it's wonderful to have this live studio audience here at ABB. Thank you very much for hosting us. And there's also more than 300 of you online. So we're really keen to get your questions. So we'll start with a few of mine. We'll open it up to the room here for a couple of questions, and then we'll be going online. Now, last time ABB ran an event, there was close to 100 questions in the chat. So Sophie and the team at ABB will come back to any questions over the next week that we don't get an opportunity to answer. So please post your questions, and we're keen to hear from you. But if we start, I thought I might start with Kieran and Jeff. When we think that EECA already have invested over $20 million into charging infrastructure, and now we've got over 700 public chargers in New Zealand, what do you think the government needs to be doing now around this public charging space?
I think the money's really helpful, and we're really grateful for that. We've got 7 sites that are that's helping us to invest more ahead of the curve, I think, than we would have done anyway if it was just left to our commercial terms. But I think there's 2 areas for me, which is how does the government enable the change to happen quicker? So removing barriers through, it takes 9 to 12 months to get an EV charger into one of our sites at the moment. So how can that be sped up by better information, centralising the process around the lines companies, etc., and bringing all those parties together. So I think there's some barriers there that the government is well placed to coordinate. And I think then home charging is the other big area in terms of what they can do in that space around sensible regulation that enables the market to move forward, but also addresses the issue that we see that most of our homes aren't particularly well set up or wired for what's coming. So I think the government has a role in helping people get over that hump, so to speak.
Completely agree. Do you want to add to that?
Yes, I'd agree with Kieran. The money's been extremely helpful in promoting it. The things that we would like to see is regulation. There's a lot of confusion in the market, so they produce guidances, but they're not law or ratified from an electrician's point of view, so that would help. I'd like to see that tidy up. The guidance, I think, is quite good. There's been discussion with EECA on, we would like to see a hyper network. So the 300 kilowatt network will get rid of frustration from charging, which is good. The other incentive is the EECA funds are good, and they're very good for government, and they're very good for public application, but for corporate, they have nothing. So we would like to see some incentive or some motivation or assistance from the government for corporates to move.
Absolutely. Look, Drive Electric really support what you're saying too, and they particularly, around regulation in that home space, and then also WorkSafe have confirmed to Drive Electric that some of those bugbears around the addendums and guidelines will be ironed out next year, which is really positive, because I guess if we think about the EV movement, we've gone from 5 years ago, we had, the big issue was range anxiety, and we're certainly going to charger, anxiety. Kieran, it's great to see that, Z is coming into the market. Can you give us a little bit of a flavour of what you're looking to roll out and in the next year and subsequent years?
Yeah, sure. So our target at the moment is by March to have 14 of our sites up and running with chargers. Trying to have a bit more of a focus in the Upper North Island, but as well for that initial tranche. But by 2025, we aim to have a national network of coverage across, a lot of our sites where it makes sense across New Zealand, as well as, working with third parties.
Great. And Duncan, ABB's been a real leader in this, DC public charging space. What do you see happening in the market, and what would you like to see happening in the market?
I guess from our perspective, some consultation around what the plans are. Firstly from EECA's side, we tend to get very short time frames for our customers, so there's a lot of pressure around supply chain. Unfortunately for New Zealand. You know, we're at the end. We're at the end of the supply chain for most manufacturing facilities, right? So a bit more, I guess, consultation there would be great. But you know, I think we need to invest more in the faster chargers. You know, the high speed DC charging, and that will reduce your anxiety, right? Because the cars are sitting for a shorter period of time. So I think that's a real need right now, is to have the faster chargers, but also to focus on the private, you know, sector as well. So having like residential focus as well, so people aren't so reliant on the infrastructure that's being put in the DC. So, you know, just I guess more of a consultation around what the plan is, and then we can then abide to that plan. You know, work with EGA.
Great. And Dwayne, you know, now we're seeing 55% of in that luxury market sale EV, which is fantastic. So this is your wheelhouse. What are your customers telling you they want to see happening with charging infrastructure, and what are the bugbears?
Well, I guess it's still range. How far can I travel? Where do I charge? You know, we sort of front-footed this a few years ago now by making that journey easier by providing free home checks when you purchase one of our vehicles. We also now contribute towards that installation, just to make that whole journey to EV simple and smooth. And I think the government's got a part to play in that, taking it to the next level. And I look at Europe in particular, where, you know, they're providing incentives to do solar and other forms of alternative charging for their home. So battery storage, for example. So I think there's a whole nother area to go to in that place. But definitely it's still that range anxiety is still playing a little part, but also where can I charge? And that education piece is so important today about treat your car as your phone, your mobile phone, and, you know, you don't need to run it flat and then fill it. You just snack on it or top it up when you need to. I think that's the game changer.
And for all of you, we can see the technology is obviously developing really rapidly. Where do you think we're going in charging infrastructure? What are the different technologies that you're keeping an eye on, and where do you think we're going to be in 10 years' time?
Well, from my side, there's two parts to that. One is the vehicle itself,
yes,
which is moving ahead very quickly,
yeah.
Particularly in battery technology. Battery technology is evolving very quickly. You know, now we can, instead of previously having to replace a whole battery, we can repair componentry in a battery, so that battery can last a lot longer. We can keep the state of health stronger for longer. There's the thermal management of the battery, so that enables it to go further. All these pieces of technology are evolving very quickly. From an infrastructure point of view, it's really around the speed. You know, Kiwis are creatures of habit. You know, they know how long it takes to fill their tank of diesel or petrol up. The expectation is sort of similar with an EV. Well, they're having to learn quite quickly. It's not quite as quick, and a cup of coffee needs to go in there as well. So, you know, the charging speed and hyperchargers is quite critical to, you know, and bearing in mind the majority of people with an EV are not travelling that far every day. It's that, you know, that occasional journey on the weekend or on a holiday period when they're going out of town, which is when they need the network of chargers. But if they get familiar and have the ability to charge at home, they're more than catered for.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Look, the average trip in Auckland is 38 kilometres. In the rest of the country, it sits between 22 and 29 kilometres. But we have this perception that we're going further in our cars. With the charging infrastructure, for the rest of the panel, where do you see the technology moving, and how fast do you see us heading in that direction?
How much time do you have?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of different segments, I guess, in that market, right? So we've got like from a residential perspective, there's the vehicle to something, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. You know, so there's a lot just in that part of the market. We've got battery energy storage solutions for more regional. You know, so I think like over time, I think, you know, where there's no like decent grid, we're going to have to look at other options for battery charging, right? We're going to have trickle charging to batteries, to dumping into cars, and we're going to have to look at megawatt charging as well for the heavy fleet, you know, for trucks and the buses. So, I mean, that's still being developed, and we're obviously leading the charge there globally, but those kinds of things, you know, it's really segment-based discussions, and it's quite unique for a lot of businesses, you know, to support the future. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how it develops. But it all goes around residential and fast charging commercial. That seems to be like the trend that's happening. Yeah.
What we've seen, I totally agree with that. What we're looking at is in the home market will need to be a bit more self-contained. There'll need to be a change of behaviour to take advantage of off-peak charging. The commercial market will be one smart infrastructure. So a lot of people look at vehicles as a network, and then the building's a network. It's one network. So it needs to talk to each other. It needs to be dynamic. We need to be able to adjust cars depending on priority. We need to have AI is what we see coming. So AI learning will be huge. And it'll just be a connected market. And also to the grid. At the moment, the grid, if everyone with hot water, the ripple control, all that's got to stop. We got to have a dynamic relationship in that market. So the future is significant. There'll be storage, solar. It needs to be an all-embracing one answer, really.
I can add to that actually, because from our dealer network, we've installed our standard's been 50 kilowatt as a minimum for DC charging. So that has put some of our dealerships under a bit of stress when it comes to load management, to your point, Jeff, and we've had to put load management systems in place with some of those dealers. What's now taken to another level where we've got dealers putting solar panels across their dealership roofs to provide that additional charge, additional source of power, I guess. So that sustainable topic now comes up as a sort of a leading edge to the whole topic of EVs.
Yeah, actually that's a good point. Decarbonising the fleet is just pushing more carbon load onto buildings. We got to be looking at decarbonising everything. So that's the biggest question. Now, the fleet is one thing, but you've just gone and pushed significant load onto a building, which hopefully isn't burning coal from Huntly. Yeah. So these things need to be. It's definite a change, and as it's evolving, I mean, you've got real world experience. It's being experienced. People are going, oh, we need to think about things differently.
Definitely. And if you think our power consumption is forecast to go up 50% by 2050, what technologies are we going to need? You've touched on smart charging. ABB is probably well placed to answer this question.
I guess from our perspective, we're seeing, typically in Auckland, when you look at, I guess, the wealthier suburbs, right, they're typically the oldest parts of Auckland, right? So you got the Ponsonbys, you got the coastal areas here. It's a lot of very old infrastructure, when you look at electrical. So load management from our perspective is a big discussion. We're talking to all our customers around what does your building have to support EV charging, right? So that's probably top of mind at the moment, integrating systems for customers. And that, I think that, when you're looking at, 10, 20 years ago when, maybe when a dealership was built, that was only built to sustain lighting, maybe a coffee machine and some computers. It was never built to sustain a 50 kilowatt, 100 kilowatt charger, So we have to work with those, with a lot of contractors and end users to ensure that they can, provide a charging system for a customer without tripping the pole fuse and, losing power on their site. So, that's a big push for us at the moment.
I think another issue too, particularly in Auckland, is infill housing. So the demand is just going nuts by you're turning a quarter-acre section into 10 apartments. What's the charging solution there? So the government's really got to step up and go, an EV traffic jam is still a traffic jam. So we need to be able to go, there needs to be a little bit of consideration at older neighbourhoods as well, older homes. So for the residential work we do in older homes, it can be extremely cost expensive, because it's a switchboard, it's a complete upgrade of the building. A newer home is easier. So there's a lot of little issues that need to be looked at on the demand and the way and the grid's been designed to come from the generator to the consumer, not really back the other way. So an issue, a standalone microgrid, you are starting to have a bit of, you've got to consider where you are, grid entry points for high power. You don't want to, to get the cost right, it needs to be close to the grid entry point. There's lots of consideration, which from a development point of view for Z, is ECA are thinking about that now. I know on their hyper network, they are kind of going here are the spots and trying to eliminate some of the barriers to allow it to happen. But we have to change. And, for me, it's smart. This building should know intuitively, this room's got a lot of people in it. We might need a little bit more air conditioning. There's no people in it, turn it all off. So we've got to start being smart with everything we do.
I completely agree. Now, there'll be a lot of people online that will be wanting to put EVs into their businesses. And it's funny, you know, at Zilch, we find everyone gets really excited talking about the EVs first. But actually, the charging infrastructure is just so critically important to get right when you're thinking that, you know, those cables are going to be in there for 50 years. Yes, you can, you know, swap around your chargers. What's your advice to a business?
So our process is really 3 steps.
Yeah.
The first one is, what are you doing with your fleet? Is your fleet, do you actually need all these cars?
Yeah.
How do you use these cars? And it's quite surprising when you, as you'd know, when you look at your fleet. Then the next one is look at the infrastructure and go, well, I need these cars, where do I want them? Can I accommodate them in this area? The other discussion in that accommodation is, how do I want to use them? Are they a pool car? So if it's a pool car, it changes overnight, there's not really an issue. It's in a common space, so the charging infrastructure, in terms of capacity, you can shift the load to the night. Or do you want to be able to charge during the day? You know, what's your demand? And then the last bit obviously is purchase the car and do the infrastructure. But I think I would insist on those three steps. I think even in the home, and as Audi does, is a inspection of the home just eliminates any surprise for the homeowner. Because I bought my fancy car, come home, and it's going to cost me $10,000. Got to rewire my house. People kind of need to know that before they start. And it's good to see the initiative from the dealerships doing things like that.
It's actually even taken to another step. People looking at building a new home are asking us, you know, what can I look at? What do I need to do? So we'll offer, we'll engage with our provider to offer advice on that. So the general public are now starting to think a little bit more laterally around, you know, my future mobility solutions, and having a charger capability in a home is becoming not quite normal, but I think it will be in a short space of time, you know, a normal thing to have in your home as an option. And it's quite an attractive thing when you're looking to buy a home as well, particularly with the marketplace today, where there's lots of EVs on the market. They're growing, you know, there's more and more models coming. So, you know, very quickly it's evolving into an EV world. Yeah.
Hallelujah. Yeah, and I know at Zilch we talk to our customers about, you know, home chargers, work chargers and public chargers, and having a combination of those. The solution might not be, you know, just one, it might be two, you know, it might be all three that a business needs, but there certainly are some challenges, you know, around power constraints. If we switch it and look at the EVs that are coming in, like I found it really interesting talking to one of your colleagues, Dwayne, that they explained to me that the average car has 700 semiconductors in it, and I was like, wow. And obviously there's been a semiconductor shortage. What are you seeing in supply chains? Because we've got fantastic uptake. We've just, you know, hit 50,000 EVs. We've got the State Decarb Fund, which is really driving EV sales into the Crown agencies, which is fantastic to see. What are we seeing in supply chain, and what are we going to expect to see over the next couple of years? Yeah,
really good question. And the semiconductor issue we're facing still is not just specifically aimed at EVs or hitting EVs. It's covering all parts of the motor vehicle. Because everything from electric window to the lights have a semiconductor. So we're seeing lots of challenges in options that you would normally expect in a car not being able to be provided at the moment, to, you know, the supply chain of the actual car. But there's 3 things that are really impacting on supply, and supply is tough not only for us but for most motor vehicle manufacturers. Ukraine is one key one. Ukraine produces a lot of the wiring looms for motor vehicles, so that's had a big impact on all of our models. COVID did have a big impact because we had, you know, less production because of less people to build the cars. Shipping has been another one. There's a numerous number of things that have caused supply chain issues. And right now our challenge is the demand is growing for EVs, and our challenge is to meet that demand. And on top of all that, you've got countries in Europe have got mandates in place, you know, to change their fleets to EVs, and they are taking those production slots that little New Zealand would normally have, you know, because our volume is, you know, small compared to the bigger market. So, you know, we're continually having discussions to try and increase our supply. But it is an issue.
And, you know, Audi's a really progressive brand. Do you see, technology-wise, what changes do you see happening? Obviously, we've got solid-state batteries. When are we expected to see those rolling out?
Gee, I'd love to know that answer to that question. But that aside, yes, you're right. Technology is the forefront of our business, and you could say that's why Audi put their and Porsche put their hand up to go into Formula One, because Formula One's going to that hybrid mobility solution. So it's going to be interesting, but it's all about battery technology. How can we get longer life, longer range, smaller, more compact, and solid state goes in that direction. But I don't think anyone's quite nailed the solid state battery yet. I'm saying this generally, but it's definitely battery technology is where the focus is. Everyone's manufacturers have put their hand up, investing billions in the EV revolution and developing technology. So whether it be a battery, whether it be the drivetrain units, etc. It's exciting times. If you ever wanted to be in the industry, now's the time. And I go back to when I first joined the industry as a mechanic. Carburetors were, being able to tune a carburetor was a way of getting efficiency out of a car. Today, it's about battery technology and how can I ensure the health of the batteries as it is, and the electric engines are doing what they need to do. It's very exciting times, particularly for our young generation, which we need into the industry today.
Brilliant. And Kieran, Zed's making a big investment into EV. Are there any other technologies that you are looking at, whether it's hydrogen? Do you see EV as the future, or are we going to be superseded by something else?
I think from Zed's point of view, we've always said that we're, for solving what matters for that moving world. So, that's fuel at the moment, and in most cases that's EV. Hydrogen will have a role to play. We're relatively agnostic on what that is, and we're not wedded to any one of those technologies. It's about moving with that market and helping our customers transition. So I think hydrogen will definitely have a role out there. Different type, EV in its many forms. It's not just at a petrol station anymore. It's at your place of work, at your home. You're going to refuel or charge up in a very different way than you have before. And there's also, from our network, just, how do you keep people moving? It's not just about their vehicle, it's about keeping them sustained and on the go as well.
Definitely. And for the whole panel, what do you think we need to do to be future-proofed for this industry? Starting with you, Jeff.
I was hoping you'd make me last. I think, well, probably let's start off from a people point of view. We need to, the market, as Dwayne said, is pretty exciting. As an electrician, this is a pretty good time. We're going digital. So I think the key thing is probably attracting, and we unfortunately are an extremely male-dominated industry. And so I think attracting some new blood and a bit of gender diversity would be real good. We're no longer dragging big drums of cable around. It's software, it's technology, it's connected, it's holistic. So for me, people is what I'd like to see. More people in, new people, and more diverse in the market.
Yeah, Jeff, I agree with that totally. I think we're all struggling with getting staff. Our employment levels are never been at this state, and we're really in a tough patch with our industry because the skill level has gone right up there, and having that skill in electrification is critical today. So people it is, but I think the other thing is a clear and simple message to the general public how easy it is to own an EV and the benefits of that. I don't think we quite do enough of that. I know in Audi I do, with training with our people, but that message could go wider and be done by more people. I think education plays a big part.
Kieran, what about for you?
Yeah, a couple of things on my mind. It's going to require an ecosystem to actually deliver out the future and what it needs of many of the players in this room and others. And so I think there's a need for coordination and think about how that ecosystem works efficiently. There's a government role as well as a private sector role in that. And then I think there's a view around future-proofing, which is not only about building out a bigger network and all those things, but actually thinking differently about actually do we need to replace like for like? You know, just because we had, 4 million, 4 billion cars, do we need 4 billion EVs in the future? Probably not. We need to think a bit differently about mobility and what that means about, how we use energy in total, as opposed to just replacing one world with a slightly shinier new world.
And Duncan, what about for you?
Yeah, I agree with Kieran. I mean, I think people need be a bit more open-minded around EVs. I follow a lot of forums, and there's obviously a lot of petrol heads out there, who love the sound of a V8. Some people I work with as well. But having driven an EV and worked with an EV myself, and I guess that ecosystem plays. I'm charging at home, I'm charging at work. It makes it a lot easier. I think if people dip their toes in, maybe with a hybrid and give it a go, I think they'll be surprised. I think it's just a real mindset change for people. Yeah, I think if people adopt it, then we'll be successful, because it will drive demand, it will drive charging infrastructure, it will drive change at the power generation, it will change a lot, because it doesn't change without demand. So I think just people being open-minded will make that happen.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to take some questions from the room if we've got some questions. Otherwise, we can ask some from the chat. Have we got any questions from the room for our panellists? Oh gosh, oh, here we go. And if you just introduce who you are, Jonathan, to start off.
Jonathan Ewing from iwi Energy. Question for Kieran. Price point of 69 cents a kilowatt hour has been mentioned. Can you speak to something about how you see your strategy going forward for pricing energy?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one in terms of the process we went through the land there. Partly it was looking at the cost return that we have to try and get, and certainly not, we're not getting positive returns out of our investment into this for the next 2 or 3 years at least, probably longer, in terms of the amount of capital that you have to deploy. So then partly it's looking at what feels right for the customer, what's the industry standard at the moment, what are you paying at home, and what are you actually, at 69 cents versus, $2.70 odd. There's a fairly good comparison going on there as well in terms of that value exchange. But pricing is a really interesting one in terms of we certainly don't price to get your return on capital at the moment at this sort of scale, because this is a scale business. So you need to be looking to the future as to, is that going to be a reasonable price in the future when you've got 100 sites doing this, or a larger network?
I've got a question over here from Debbie from ABB.
So Debbie from ABB. Kieran, this is for you maybe. Are we going to see sort of the same fuel station that they are deploying now in Europe, where there is multiple charges like in a normal forecourt? Maybe you can just elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, and it kind of links to that pricing question as well, around going, if you're paying that high, 69 cents versus your home electricity rate, you expect a different level of service. So you expect it to be a lot faster. You expect convenience and other amenities around that. It's definitely something we're looking at. Jeff mentioned the ECA funding round 5 at the moment, which is looking at those bigger cluster sites. So it's definitely something we're looking at. We are actively working around regulation, around actually how you can you have petrol pumps and EV chargers under canopy in the same place? Do you have to have them separately? We will, in the future, look at having EV-only sites. That will make sense as well, with other amenities. So, and it's likely to be a blend. I mean, the interesting thing we look at about the future of a fuel station is that they will over time tip towards EV, but even once we get to 100% EV vehicle sales, you're still going to probably have half your fleet needing petrol and then diminishing down. So we're in an interesting space that we're going to have to serve those two markets and get those balances right across the network that we have.
I think that's a good point, Debbie, because we're seeing, in the industry, the PEV take-up is just going as strong as BEV. So there's still that sort of middle ground, people not quite wanting to take the leap of faith into a full electric car, and that PEV is the best of both worlds. So to Kieran's point, there's going to be that need for fuel for quite a long time, I'd say. Yeah.
And it's a really good question because, you know, at the moment with our public charging infrastructure, we've really got, you know, 1 or 2 chargers in a site. They're not designed for people that are towing trailers. They're not designed for EV trucks. So it's fantastic to see, you know, ECA's round 5 at the moment, and they're very much looking at that, you know, journey charging, destination charging and home charging. And if we break it up like that, we've got work to do, you know, on all 3 areas. But, you know, I guess the positive thing is that, you know, our current Minister of Transport, Michael Wood, you know, has identified through to Drive Electric that he knows charging infrastructure, you know, needs some work. And we've got ECA, you know, with the fund, you know, creating the strategy and the roadmap too, which is really positive. And then obviously we've got some work to do around regulations on home chargers, and we've got people coming into the space on destination charging. Do you see Zed having a role in that destination charger piece, or are you just looking at that journey charger piece?
No, we're definitely looking across that whole ecosystem. We want to make it as easy for customers to transact. So you create a network, and that's great. You know, we'll put our own hardware into our sites, etc. But then there'll be a lot of other people that will want to have hardware or charging solutions in their space. And how do you connect that up and make it easy for the customer? So we're talking to a lot of folks at the moment around actually how you can be part of a network and it solves that customer experience. I don't have to have 15 fobs or different relationships in the future, etc. You know, roaming will become a thing as well, which will make it easier. Because I think the big thing is that as much as we see charging speeds getting faster, etc., and the focus on that, people are going to charge differently than how they feel, because you don't have a choice today. You know? So you've got to go to a petrol station basically, and that's the model. If you're on a long journey, you want to probably get it down to 10, 15 minutes type break and, you know, have a stretch, you know, recharge your car and keep going. But a lot of destination, you know, people are going to be doing other tasks, and charging won't be the predominant task. They'll be going, hey, I'm doing the shopping, I'm at the mall, I'm doing something else. I might as well get my car charged up at the same time when they're out and about. So have to think a little bit differently about how the ecosystem works.
Definitely. And there's a few questions coming through on the chat. I've got one here from Chris Verberg, who said, where are we at with vehicle to grid on the New Zealand infrastructure?
I think it's a pretty new concept for New Zealand. I know there's you know, we're developing a product at the moment which is going to be launched likely next year. So it's pretty early stages. You know, it's definitely a topic of discussion now, and I guess there's a bit of regulation around, you know, how that's supported in the House. So there's still early stages, but keep an eye on the technology, and ABB specifically is launching next year, so just keep an eye out, and we'll keep you in the loop.
Brilliant. And we've got a question here from John Wong. Where do you see standardisation of EV charging plug is going in the future? Will CCS dominate?
Yes.
Yeah.
I wish I hoped.
Yeah. I know.
Pretty much.
As a charge point operator, the Leaf's a fantastic vehicle and it serves a really great market, but when you're putting in hardware and you're having to sort of, you know, get that both in terms of the plugs, the space it takes up, the different charge speeds around that, and for that market, it's, you know, an interesting challenge to deploy capital.
I think the motor industry has actually recognised that too,
Yes.
Kirsten, and you know, simplification is the key.
Hallelujah to that too. Simon Briggs has got a question. We have an ageing distribution infrastructure, which is a real barrier to public charging infrastructure. How quickly do you think network companies will invest to upgrade their networks? Great question, Simon. Yeah, 29 EDBs in this country. It is a challenge for us.
I wish I knew the answer to that.
Yeah.
It's probably a question we're asking a lot of the lines companies at the moment. And it's not, again, you kind of have to sit in their seat as well. We're one of many needs. It's not like we're the only need that they have. You know, the New Zealand's been growing, the demand's been growing across all sectors, and we're just about spiking there. And we're using electricity in quite a different way when you're using charging assets to traditionally how electricity's probably been used by large scale buildings, and you know, you sort of put in this massive, quite a big lick of capacity that you seldom hit in terms of your peak loads. So There's some interesting challenges there. It's we've talked to some of them they're putting in new transformers for us at sites. It's a 20-year view, and we're going, I think we'll be out of this in 3.
Yeah.
That's again changing their thinking.
Yeah.
A better way to think about it for the networks, I think, is at the moment they provision capacity whether you use it or not.
Yes.
And at the moment they should be going, they need to do an upgrade, but what they really should be looking at is how can we integrate better with the customer. Because instead of just having, I'm going to set this block of load away and whether it's used or not, that's got to change. If that changes, then that doesn't, the infrastructure, you're right, you put a new transformer in, it's hugely expensive, and you're only really putting it in because they've got to position off some load to supply the network or the surrounding people. Now, that needs to be rethought. I think the ecosystem is a good idea. Everyone's got to step back and go, the networks have been sitting in a situation where demand has been relatively flat because of LED and energy efficiency. It's kind of, even though that we've got growth, it's stayed pretty neutral. We're about to move into increasing demand territory, and I think the networks have got to look at stuff differently.
So how do you think we coordinate that though, with 29 EDBs that have got different pricing, different strategies, different drivers? Who's going to play a role in creating that ecosystem? Does government need to get involved? What are your thoughts? You were giving me a nod there, Kieran.
You asked up front about regulation. I think this is where the government can help. This is about joining the dots. There's a lot of players in that each on their own are doing the best thing they can for their bit, but how do you get that coordinated view across that? It's something as simple as even having a shared data pool of capacity across the network would be amazing. I know they've done that in the UK. We don't have that yet. Each of the EDBs have got their own data strategy for how they share that, but for us it takes months to find out what capacity looks like in places. So there's simple things like that I think the government can bring that together and to streamline and help those conversations, and that's probably going to get us a lot faster than even just pushing money in, because if it's just money spent on the existing structure, you're just almost kicking the can down the road.
You could argue that retailers can influence, like Contact at the moment have offered night free power.
Yes.
So they're making a play for the EV market. So the retailer could drive, they could be a bit of a uniting force because there's not that many of them.
Yes.
Well, actually there's a lot more now, but there's less. But they are coming at it and starting to drive behaviour which will force the network to do something about it. So Transpower's got a global view, but the EDBs are, I think their hand could be forced by the government driving Transpower and the consumer driving via the retailer.
That's a good point, Jeff. Now we've got a great question from Emily Adams who's saying AI control of EVs was mentioned. What does this mean, and what industry roles do you see being involved in this intelligent ecosystem?
Electricians?
Yeah.
so what
security firms?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we would see with AI is learning. So you've got 10 charges and there's a behaviour of the usage of those charges in your building. You can start anticipating or learn and gather information and go, what does it look like? How do I manage them? If I've got fobs, I can prioritise the user. I can start learning. Occupancy, I can see movement. I know what's happening. Weather, I know what's happening with the weather, so I can make a decision. That's where AI, it's just data mining really. And at the charge point, what it's really about is if we all arrive at once for a charger, do we share it? Or does it know that I'm generally in for the day because it's in my diary, I'm going nowhere, allow these guys to get more power. So that's the level of integration that we are excited about. That's how we see it.
From my side, the cars are quite intuitive today. I can look at my charging on my phone. Is it full? Is it not? I can control my charging. And I can time it. So I've plugged it in, but it'll only turn on between 11 and 7. It'll charge through the night, so it won't charge when when I'm having dinner, as an example. So the cars are becoming quite intuitive and very communicative as well. And I think that plays a big part because that manages when and how you charge. As long as you know, again, it comes back to education on use and being able to be comfortable with that technology to manage your charging of your car wherever you are, whether you're in the car or out of the car.
And with that AI lens then, this may be a tricky question for you, Dwayne, but we're on this road to autonomy. How do you see us tracking and when do you see us getting there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If I think about, go back 2 years, autonomous driving was a heard everywhere. Everyone's talking about it, and it's really slowed a little bit now. And I think the technology focus has shifted to that sort of EV side. I think there's still a lot to learn in autonomous driving. You know, Tesla has taught us a lot in many ways, but and I think everyone's playing a little bit cautious with it. But the technology aside is still being developed and still being tested, and we're seeing it slowly come into our cars with, you know, very, very good driving assistance systems that are more accurate, more sensitive. Yeah, so I think it's evolving, but slower than what we initially thought. Timeline, I couldn't give you a timeline. Yeah, to be honest, I think it's more important to get that EV piece nailed. You know, and what's the future of mobility looking like is important.
And if we look at vehicle to grid then, like the European manufacturers have been at the forefront, when do you think we'll see vehicle to grid, you know, as a standard feature of EVs?
Yeah, a good question. I think it's years, not months or days. But it's definitely on the thinking. You know, we're hearing more and more about it. So I think within the next few years, I think it'll become more mainstream. Particularly, you know, when everything's been pushed to the limits. You know, particularly our homes. You know, I think that there's a lot to play in that home space, and your home and your car are partnered together. You know, when we think about those peak times of using power in our homes, and even when you're travelling and you might need to, you go camping as an example, you know, your EV becomes a whole new world, a whole new tool, you know, so.
I think the determining factor, as Duncan said, is the charger. The charger is the key. The charger's got to be able to reverse what's going on. It's got to integrate with the building, and hopefully it's a year away, and then we see where it goes. So the charger to me is key. The cars obviously are smart enough to communicate, but it's the integration with the facility or the infrastructure, I think, will be the determining factor.
We mentioned AI, right? So you're looking at your car as a battery on wheels, you know. Correct. So if you've got different pricing model at home, correct, then you can then feed your house from your car during the peak times, and then you can charge it back when it's cheaper. So that kind of thing will also be integrated into your AI, you know, hypothetical future. And those are kinds of things, right? And again, you know, having that tool to, you know, for example, charging, you know, another friendly EV driver who's run out of you know, power, right? So you can then pull over, charge their vehicle, and help them along the way. So again, it's that ecosystem sort of mentality, right? Yeah. There's a whole lot going into that. And
an interesting one in AI, we have a software provider in Germany, and they have suggested the idea of the cars communicate now. They have their own bus. They communicate via laptops to the facility. That the charger could be a portable for that, which is a really interesting thought, because every time you tether your car, it could be a way to communicate back to the factory, tells you some stuff about it. So that's really early in the piece, but that was a really interesting discussion. So I don't know, you know, that's a good example of how things are changing. Now we're in a digital world, we can do anything.
Absolutely. Now we've got Michael Roth, great to have you online, Michael, who's doing a great job at Auckland Council with policy there. So he's got a question saying, at Auckland we want to mandate that all new parking spaces are pre-wired to facilitate smart home and workplace charging, but this doesn't seem to be a priority for the government. What needs to happen? And I could say, Michael, definitely Drive Electric are advocating and supporting your comments with government on that. But any other comments from the panel?
Lobbying, really. I would have thought the local council's just got to just keep beating on the door.
Yeah, because it's interesting if you look at, say, Norway, that started, they were so progressive, they started in 1990, but a lot of it was driven by the policies. So they have a right to charge policy. So if you're a landlord you've got an apartment, you have to allow charging for all of your tenants by law. And then if you think about New Zealand, we still have got a 3-pin plug mentality that, you know, a lot of, you know, charging at home is via a 3-pin plug. But what we're hearing from you today is, you know, smart charging is key. And you look at countries like Norway where they've put that policy in place, which is what Michael wants to see, that new houses have to be built with the provision for EV charging infrastructure.
We would agree.
So, Michael, you're right. It really does need to happen, and certainly Drive Electric are working really hard advocating on that point with government. Marjorie's got a question in here saying, in other geographies, I've seen solar panels added as roofing for open parking lot car parks, providing shade energy collection. Seems ideal to work with EV charging. Is this part of the discussions and the roadmap?
I mean, definitely solar's fantastic, in the ecosystem, but I guess the panel size versus the charger size is very different, right? So you might have a roof space of 2 or 3 kilowatts, but your charger might be 50 kilowatts, right? So it's good for, still great for the environment to have solar rather than potentially coal, but it's a lot of solar panels for a 50 kilowatt charger. So you're going to still need to have battery energy storage, and that's where that battery energy storage really plays its part regionally, where you don't have the grid to support. So I think still opportunities still there for a lot of destination charging to have solar, but I don't think it's quite there to mimic solar and feeding exactly what you need from the charger perspective. You're still going to have some kind of storage solution at the site. So, but I think it's definitely something that's been rolled out in other countries, and I think New Zealand should definitely look at that from a green perspective, because we do have a philosophy of a green country, and we want to maintain that position, right? So I think that there's a place for it, but I think there's still a lot of work to do there in the solar technology space for us to get to a point where there's parity between the panel and the charger.
I think the use case to start with will be that sort of solar battery microgrid where you're just trying to solve your peak load, where actually your network upgrade is way expensive in that location, or it's a better alternative once you get a whole lot of folks with roof space in an area creating their own local microgrids and things like that. So, but it's about shaving that peak off so you don't have to keep putting more capital into the network.
I think from a residential perspective it makes sense, because it's usually lower trickle charging, and that makes that would be better. Commercial, I think there's still work to be done.
It definitely will provide more resilience to climate change as well, from a regional level, if we've got battery storage and solar. What do you think we need to do to scale that solution in New Zealand? How can we scale it? Battery's going to play, is going to play a really key role.
Financial support packages. That's really it. And it's worked in other countries. Germany is one case in point, where it was, homeowners were supported, and I think and I look at some of our dealers who have been looking at it and have done the analysis. It supports the existing network. It doesn't take it away. It doesn't replace it, and you do need the storage batteries. But it is becoming almost you need to do that, or to take it to the next stage. Have a partnership between solar and the grid.
We've got a question from Jenny, just saying around public charging sites, that at night they're not well lit, and from a Z Energy point of view, what are you going to do? Because that customer experience piece is just so important with EV uptake. What are you going to do, Kieran, around that customer journey and surpassing the current experience we've got around public charging infrastructure? What's up your sleeve for us?
Well, I guess we've got a nice advantage at the start.
Yeah.
All of our sites are pretty well lit with security cameras and all
Yeah.
those things. We're making sure wherever we put in chargers that we're putting in the light poles and those. We're looking at what are our, we will look at what sort of canopy solutions we can find going forward on that in terms of managing the space on the site. So I think, that customer experience is going to be really key if we've going through that early adoption phase, but how do we actually get the next, first 50,000 folks really keen, got in there for good reasons, but what's the next 50 or 100,000 people looking for? They're going to be looking for more equivalency with the sort of experience they have today.
I think the other one, ECA and their grants, when they're allowed, they should be mandating it slightly. We're getting charging points put in the back of the supermarket somewhere, which at night is not a pleasant place to be. They could just put a little bit more standard around it and go, guys, you need to make this safe.
Yeah.
We want to see some lighting here, we want to see some cameras, and then you can put your charger there. That would be, because there is, at the moment, like Z obviously, their adoption will be good, but there's a lot of charging stations at the moment that have been funded by the government that are, I don't think I'd be too comfortable charging at night there.
And I think that was Jenny's point.
We actually launched that product earlier this year, the Terra 360, that was so bright that tenants that lived across the road from the product quickly dimmed down. So, you know, when you're talking about light, I think that product would probably suit that need.
Yeah.
Unintended consequences.
Unintended consequence, yeah.
Yeah. We've got a great comment from Mark Reeves, who's just saying, enjoying the conversation. We're talking a lot about the residential EV space. Are we seeing key barrier to heavy fleet and commercial vehicle adoption coming back to the grid and charging infrastructure?
Reeves, a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something, and I've got a conversation on this later today, thinking about, you know, one of our customers who've got a large heavy fleet and will probably be wanting to go through that definitely going through that decarbonisation process, going, how are they thinking about charging? Are you going to do it all back at your depot? Does your use case of the vehicle runs you have allow you to do that? Do you need top up on the go? Do you need it at site or at someone else's depot when you're getting to the other end? So there's quite a lot for us to work through. I said it's not quite the same as just our truck stops all around the country. There'll definitely be, once you get to line haul and the longer trips, yes, you will need to have those charge points and break points, you know, around that regulation along the way. But the use cases are quite different. And then it's like, the biggest challenge for us, I mean, it's probably great for ABB if you put a charger into every depot or two, but in reality, is that cost effective for the grid and for those businesses? So we're going to have to think about what that looks like going forward as well.
Yeah, it's quite topical around buses, particularly because I know in Auckland specifically, I guess the focus is putting the charging infrastructure back on the bus operator, you know, where that maybe isn't the best solution. You know, we talk about opportunity charging, you know, and having a bus that has a route and then if it can charge on the go, then there's less batteries, there's less weight on the axle, and it takes away from having to go back to the depot, you know. So there is, obviously it comes down to cost though as well, right? It's not a cheap solution to have opportunity charging, and maybe a depot charger is the best way to go for now if the finances aren't available. But, you know, there's definitely things that can be done to, you know, support the heavy fleet, and megawatt charging is going to be one of those things. You know, it's going to be that very fast charge to a big battery bank. You know,
fundamentally, I think we're going to have to rethink fleet utilisation and even how you operate that fleet. If you try and fit that new tech into the old way of doing it, you're going to say, well, actually, maybe when you go step right back and go, actually, what is the best way to utilise a fleet in this new world, as opposed to just trying to retrofit it?
It's not uncommon for us to have a truck parked at our charger at our dealership in Great North Road, charging, ironically.
Yeah.
And that's a 175 kilowatt charger, but still, you know, it does have to sit there for a period of time.
Yeah.
So speed and the size of the charger is critical, which comes with a cost. So, yeah, big topic.
Yeah, it is a big topic. And I guess, you know, ECA are across it, and this is what the fund that closed this week is all about. You know, how can we create charging infrastructure for the heavy sector, as well as the commercial, and as well as more mass light vehicles as well. We've got a really good question here from Court Dixon saying, what, if any, plans are in place for the end of life of EV batteries in New Zealand, such as stationary energy storage?
There's lots happening in that space now. From my side, we've partnered with Upcycle as a company, and it's a mandate from the factory. We have to partner with someone, and we're happy to do that. And we're seeing a lot of these, batteries that have come to end of life being repurposed for storage devices for homes, which is great. And that is the future. So these batteries, when they do come to the end of their journey, they can be repurposed, and or the makeup of the battery, the chemicals can be taken out and repurposed in other ways. So there's certainly a full circle of life with a battery today.
Yeah, there's an opportunity, I think, for second life batteries, in New Zealand, I think, because when you take it out of a car, then you kind of want to then use it in commercial environment, and then once it's degraded, then you move into residential, right? So you've got one of our customers now working on an opportunity where they're using second life batteries in an EV charger installation. So they're trickle charging the second life batteries and then they're dumping that into the charger. So there are opportunities to use the second life batteries, but again, ecosystem plays a big part in how we look at it from a 50,000 foot view. You know, what's it going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years time? So we don't have a e-waste pile, you know, somewhere in New Zealand, right?
Just a question coming in around inductive charging. You know, in China, we've seen in that heavy space, inductive charging. What do we expect to see in New Zealand around inductive charging, and is it going to be at what level, you know, in the light, the commercial or the heavy transport? Do we see it coming to New Zealand?
I think there's some work being done at Auckland University now around inductive charging. I'm not 100% across that, but it looks like a good opportunity if, but again, it's rethinking everything, right? It's rebuilding roads to support, it's the vehicle manufacturers bringing in cars that can support, and then you're looking at heavy fleet as well, right? So it's a real change in the way that we do things, right? But it doesn't mean there's no place for it. It just probably trial and then look at efficiencies. You know, like is the payback there? Does it work? Does it, you know?
I think what you will see in that space is there's we have to think about electrifying all of the support vehicles we have, so forklifts, so all of that warehousing type stuff. So you can see a lot of warehouses where inductive charging makes a lot of sense, and you'll see a lot of that automation type space there, and then more of your car parking and some of those where it may work well as in terms of being an alternative to actually having, you know, still needs to be connected the same, but it's got just a different footprint to a charger. So there'll be some use cases that serves really well.
A lot of testing has been done in that space. Like Audi did this a number of years ago, and it hasn't been put into the marketplace yet because it was found to be a bit slower induction charging than that direct cable charging.
Yes.
So I'm sure we'll see it. But yeah, it's got to be right and it's got to do the job it's intended to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Duncan, you're right. There is some work being done in Auckland, and ECA have also funded a pilot in Wellington as well. But I guess the challenge is the technology isn't quite there yet, and it is from a price point, you know, a lot higher price point than cable. So we've got cables for a while. We've got a question from the audience.
Yeah, hello, Garth Thomas, Ford Motor Company. Before we were talking about you know, the ecosystem, and part of the ecosystem is the chargers. Well, the manufacturers seem to have a good ecosystem between them and the customer, whether it be via the mobile or in the car features, etc. There's a feature that we have is Plan My Trip, and you can plan your trip from, say, here to Wellington, and it'll pinpoint the charges you can charge at. One of the failings there I see is you plan your trip and you get to a charger and it's full up, you can't charge. Is there any possibility of, or future view of being able to book the charger for when you get there? And there's that interaction of the car saying, I'm getting closer, 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 please book it for this, you know, 1 hour out or half an hour out, etc.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there we've been looking at. One, I think that their whole platform, we think that information layer is probably the most important part. I think the technology will keep moving around, but getting the ability to connect up that demand around that. So I think whether that's best done by Google or, you know, other players, you know, or many of the other mapping tools. And then the second thing we look at is how do you solve for that booking? So to get that layer done, so it's something that we've got on our roadmap to go, should we have some of our charges that we can book, especially in some of our sites where we're actually going to have we're putting them into locations for commercial customers who are time sensitive. So we might have, hey, we've got a site going in Wiri Station Road in Auckland, and that's very close to NZ Posts. One of their depots, when their drivers are actually using that site already to not go back to the depot, but to do all their swapping over of parcels and have a break and do things. And so we're going, well, that's an ideal time to charge their new e-vans as well at the same time when they shift their fleet there. So they'll want to book those sites and know that when they're there for their 30 or 40 minute break that it's available. So something that we're going to have to solve and look at that more on real-time on-demand management.
So we've looked at it. On the work we do with the government, particularly hospitals, is the concept of, and that's their own little ecosystem, but the concept of opportunity charge booking. There's doctors moving around so that to blend hybrid and opportunity, your tethered charging or pull car, and the opportunity. So it's easily done within an entity, but it's a bit more complicated when you're across multiple platforms. But it's definitely in the government agencies we work for, that is part of the mandate.
I think the charging apps are very, very good today. You know, they'll tell you if the charger's been occupied. They won't tell you if there's a queue, but if there's someone on it, it certainly shows up. But I think it does come back to how far do I need to go, and do I have enough to get there? You know, we've always got this, you know, anxious feeling of I don't have enough in the tank. It's not full, 3/4 full, and you only need a quarter to get to where you got to go. So it's a bit of a mentality change when it comes to driving an EV, which you know, we're slowly getting there, but we're not quite there yet.
Definitely. Now, I'm afraid that we've run out of time. I'd just like to thank everyone for the fantastic questions that have come online and from the room, and thank very much our panellists who've been amazing answering all of these tough questions, and also to our host ABB. Thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure on behalf of Drive Electric to be part of this webinar, and I wish you all a very, very happy World EV Day. Thank you.